right, we are back and live. I said that like as if it's a question. We are live. that is a fact.
Are we live?
It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've had the great pleasure of getting a chance to have these conversations about TrueNorth and radical resilience and how that relates to what's happening in the world right now and with men. So it is my distinct privilege and honor with Pastor Eric Hurd. This is actually going to be the closing out session or episode for season 2. And we've got a series of questions, some of which are things that I think Eric and I realized that just come up on a regular basis in the work that we do. Some were provided to us from either clients or people that were things that we thought were really relevant and significant. So we're going to go through a Q&A on what we believe are the most pressing questions to address from each of our unique perspective. So having said that, I want you to talk. If you don't mind, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you the first question.
Absolutely. I'm ready. And by the way, Andy, I love doing this with you because we've known each other for years. And, I've always held an axiom in leadership, and that is you can't lead somebody where you haven't been. So this topic of resilience, I have utter confidence in you because I've watched you work through difficulty in your life, stay the course, and you have the resilience you're calling out in other men. So I just want you to know I love doing this with you.
Well, Eric, I'm just humbled by that and very grateful. And I know the feeling is certainly very mutual. Your story stands up for itself, right? Mm-hmm. And then getting to know you on a personal level, and then actually getting a chance to see how you lead men and how many lives that you've impacted and the leadership that you display and the resilience, both historically and present day. Really, it's an honor to have these conversations and to be your friend. So
thank you, my friend.
Yeah.
Well, let's get going into it.
Okay. First question. What does the Bible say regarding the significance of being resilient and or how to be resilient?
Man, it's that's the $1 million question. And it's so interesting because when you look at people's lives, anybody can start something, but very few finish. Like there's a coined phrase that people will say that they want to finish strong. And the idea of getting to the end of your life here on earth and to have Jesus say to you, well done, good and faithful servant. In other words, you ran your race, you kept the faith, and you stayed at it. There are so many great verses for this. Like in Philippians 1:6, we know we don't do it alone. And the Apostle Paul says, he who began a good work in you will complete it till the day of Christ. So we're in this constant metamorphosis. And so he is building resilience into us. And then I look at my life verse is out of Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, it says, since we have a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, in other words, other people who showed resilience, people that went ahead of us, he said, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And you've heard me say the word race is the Greek word agonos, from which we get the English word agony. So the Bible never portrays the Christian life as easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it well. And so you constantly see this directive in the scripture of stay at it, persevere, continue on, stand up. And what I love is that it calls us as men out.
Yeah.
The Christian life was not meant for soft boys.
That's right.
It's meant for dedicated men who will do what it is that God calls them to do. And I will tell you, I am fortunate enough to be in a church where I see a lot of godly men with incredible resilience. It's because they've spent time in the Word of God, and they know that perseverance, strength, all of that is something God calls us out. And there's one other verse I would add out of 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. And it says, God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and a sound mind. In other words, again, the Christian life wasn't meant for the timid. It's meant for the powerful, and God gives us the power to do what he's called us to do.
And that is so relevant, I think, today to, really calling us forward. And you think a lot of Christians get caught up, right, when they start to experience, I think there's the whole issue of theodicy and understanding a theology of suffering and how to, reconcile, well, why am I not just experiencing an abundance of blessings? Anyways, just love that point. And
because
so
most
powerful.
of our growth comes through the suffering, not through the easy times.
That's right.
You know what the beautiful thing in doing this podcast with you is, you're a devout Christian, but you're also a dedicated psychologist. And so I have a question for you, and that is, resilience is a new buzzword today and a prerequisite to success in family life, business life, friendships, and even one's faith. For you as a psychologist, why is resilience so important? And I know you do a lot of coaching with men and women in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what you covered, right? There is no pathway to certainly any sustainable type of success, whether that be in your marriage, whether that be in your business, your health, your spiritual journey, without resilience. As you said, that we're not promised a life of ease and comfort. We are going to experience. One of my favorite books that actually initially got me interested in the field of psychology was The Road Less Traveled from M. Scott Peck. And his very first line in that book is, I think it's life is difficult. Right. And it's just a great universal now that's not it. It doesn't stop there and say life is difficult. And it's, really just an ongoing, cycle of pain and misery. But life is filled with challenges. It's filled with setbacks and pain. Part of the idea that we experience loss and we have a finite life here is also what makes life beautiful. Right. It's also, if we, if this was something, people are always looking for the fountain of youth. You see this, I think, a lot, and especially with people with tremendous amounts of money. And I think if people were to discover it here, they don't realize how miserable they would be, right? Like there's something much better promised in the afterlife. So all that to say, resilience is an absolute necessity if you want to experience any type of meaningful, sustainable success. And I think the thing that we've really mapped out here that's unique and different from a lot of other, talks on resilience and even programs on resilience is really the merger of that true north authenticity combined with resilience. That when you discover who you authentically are in Christ, it creates this organic sense of resilience. You're operating as God intended and designed for you. You're operating with a sense of purpose. You understand that God built within you certain character strengths and muscles, right? God designed you with a specific set of values, right, of what you stand for and the things that when you feel connected to them make you feel most alive. And when you're operating in that space, you feel like you can overcome just about anything, right? You feel connected to God. You feel connected to something so much bigger than just yourself. And so it gives you the ability to endure, right, to get through the agony, to persevere, but to do it really operating as the best version of yourself too, right? As the highest version of yourself. I know I reference Viktor Frankl quite a bit, but his ability to access his best self in the worst possible circumstances is what gave him a freedom that could not be taken from him, right? So even now, how am I able in the midst of a difficult moment with my wife or in business when nothing's working out, right? I just paid a huge amount of money for something and it was all, didn't have any return on investment, whatever it is, these things that can often feel incredibly defeating and deflating. But how am I able to still, affirm who God created me to be? How am I able to still put my faith and trust in the Lord and to persevere going forward? So operating in True North creates its own organic sense of resilience. And then we create resilience principles that are authentic to who we are. Right? There is no boilerplate. I mean, there is boilerplate resilience programs, but to me, that's like painting and just throwing paint on the wall, hoping that it sticks and comes out the way that you want. When you set the foundation of True North first, it's like putting a primer down, right? And then building resilience on top of it so that the paint actually sticks and comes out exactly as you'd intended, right? So you're creating and anchoring the resilience principles to the things that matter most to you, to a set of core values that you will stand by and you will persevere through. It's so much more important and personalized when you've created that authentic connection to the resilience. Does that make sense?
It totally does. I had the privilege of of doing a marriage conference at a camp for Navy SEALs. And I mean, I got to have meals with these guys and just interview them. And, they are the toughest men on the planet.
Yeah.
And there was some, just a few takeaway principles, and you just hit them. And that is, before they went into the training, there was a ceiling to their pain endurance. And what they learned was there was a greater level that they could reach when they began to see themselves as Navy SEALs, that they could push through these barriers that they had in their mind of what they could or could not do. And I mean, to listen to the training that they go through, it's rigorous. It's the most difficult in any military organization. But these guys shine because they live the law of resilience, and that is pushing yourself beyond what you're presently able to achieve. And it's like building muscle if you're a weightlifter.
Yeah.
You hit a certain weight and you think, I can't do anymore, but you come back at it the next day and the next day. And now that I'm like, Andy, did you know it's my birthday tomorrow?
I did. And I know you're about to go to one of those epic places.
In case somebody wants to send me a birthday card. But in all seriousness, at age 68, I am way tougher today than I've ever been because I've learned that principle of resilience, of staying at something and learning and growing through it. Have I ever failed? No. I've been hit off the horse, but I keep getting on the horse. You don't fail when you learn from those times that you fall.
Yeah, beautifully said.
And it'll keep you persevering and resilient when you don't call yourself a failure or you don't quit.
Yeah, has so much you read the mindset of resilience and creating a particular mindset is he has pillar 2 and part of the TrueNorth Radical Resilience is dialing into the motivation, the mindset, the meaning making narratives, and the support system. But there are just some mindsets that are more resilient than others, right? They are more the pathway to trying to be successful or to persevere is much more sustainable and much more efficient and powerful when you tap into the right mindsets. Love that. Just as the Navy SEAL, we actually reference how Navy SEALs structure kind of their culture and how it really creates such a powerful magnet for attracting the right people, the training. There's such incredible consistency in how they do it. So clear in what they stand for, and so it creates its own culture of resilience. You nailed that so well. All right. Question number 2, we talk about being resilient to your true north. What does that mean from a faith perspective or biblical perspective? And why is it significant as opposed to being resilient without a true north defined?
Well, again, when we talk about true north, that is an accurate view of ourselves. And again, I've said this, I think the best definition of humility in the Bible is out of Romans chapter 12, where he says, don't think too highly of yourself, but think accurately of yourself. Because again, in the Gospels, Jesus said, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. So we operate how we operate out of who we see ourselves as. And Andy, you know my story. I just was beaten down as a kid, and I just felt miserable all the time. I felt like I couldn't achieve, that I wasn't smart enough, that, how am I going to go to college? I'll never get a great job. And it was because it was a beat down through my childhood and teen years. Yeah. And I bit in to what everybody else was saying about me.
Yep.
And the problem was that wasn't God's view of me. And that wasn't an accurate view of me, because every person is born with the image of God. Now, what does that mean? We are like him. So if I look at all the character traits of God, I possess them to some degree or another. Now, some more than others. Right. But like one of the character traits I possess is industriousness. I remember being raised, you may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but you could put in a great effort. And you know what? I learned working hard has a payoff. Yeah. And so I'm a hardworking individual. I can take on a lot of tasks. Well, see, I view myself that way, but you've been around me. I act that way. Yeah. So this thing of true north is having that accurate view of myself, so that when I come up against, a trial, a test, a hurdle, I look at myself and say, I've endured before. I can get myself through this. I'm not going around it, because one of the sad parts about resilience is we can sabotage resilience by medicating.
Yeah.
By feeling sorry for ourselves. We might move to alcohol or drugs. We might move at our sexuality and be immoral. And we only are stripping away ourselves of that resistance and that strength that God wants to build. But if I know who I am, there's not anything I can't get through. I just got through, Andy, the documentary Screams Before Silence. It's a documentary about what took place on October 7th in Israel. This is not about the war. This is simply a documentary of what happened to men and women who were just slaughtered and sexually abused. And the constant theme I saw in there is for many of these women that survived, they said, you can do this, you can live. And they had this inner strength that even though they were being raped, even though they saw family members being killed, they resisted and they fought and they lived.
Ooh. And
I mean, it was one of the most powerful documentaries. Again, I'm not trying to make it about the war or Palestine. I'm making it about people who survived. And, it's no different than what happened in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
People survived because there was an inner strength that they developed, and it was day after day. And they wanted to live. They wanted to get back to their families, get back to their homeland. Yeah. So people that are resilient have a sense of their true north, who they are, and so it's a beautiful thing when you see it.
Have to admit, so confession here, that I have used the definition of humility as you've expressed it. So many people get humility wrong, right? They get it in the sense of, I can't possibly even feel good about myself. I need to lower and kind of degrade myself, right? Like I shouldn't feel any sense of pride or healthy pride. And so, and I think the accurate understanding, interestingly, just as a super quick, prisoners of war, right? People who have been captured, they've looked at, is it optimistic people? Is it pessimistic realism? Who are the people that seem to get through that experience in the best possible shape? People who are purely optimistic, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to get out of here quickly. I'm going to be home by Christmas or whatever. When that date comes and goes and they're not home, they actually do some of the worst. They completely fall apart and really degrade. So pure optimism actually doesn't seem to be the best way to get through. It's people who are optimistic with a sense of realism. I know this is going to be tough, right? So it's like kind of the accurate understanding of things. I know this is going to be tough, but I believe I'm going to persist and resist, and I'm going to get through this. Those are the people that not just got through it, but came back home in the best possible shape. So really fascinating.
What's just triggered something real quick. I have a close friend who he and his wife were separated for 5 years. He had done something really foolish in his marriage, and he was separated from her. And I said, how do you hang on? Because there was no hope that the marriage returning, although it has, and they've got one of the strongest marriages I've seen because they've been tested. But he said, you know what? I do what Jesus said. He said, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough trouble of its own. He said, I figured if I could live with integrity and loyalty and love for today, if I could do it today, then I'll deal with it tomorrow. And he did it for 5 years. So a lot of guys would have said, screw it, I'm out. Yeah. But he hung on. Now he has one of the best marriages I've seen.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful testament. There's like tons of resilience principles kind of packed within that. But yeah, powerful.
Well, I got another question for you, and that is, can you give an illustration on how resilience saw you through a difficult time in our life? Like I said, I think you're a great example of it, and that's why you're able to lead men. But what's an example maybe in your own life of resilience?
Yeah, so the story that comes to mind as you asked me that is one of the most difficult things I've had to go. I mean, I've had some difficult things. I struggled with profound depression in adolescence. I probably have covered just about every anxiety disorder within the anxiety disorder spectrum. I've had panic attacks to obsessive compulsive disorder. So I know what it's like to suffer, right? And I've gone through and I got into therapy because of some really brilliant therapists that helped me through some of my challenges. And really I do more kind of coaching and consulting than anything else now. But it was post marriage. So my wife and I, we got married, and in our first pregnancy, Abby got pregnant, and about 22 weeks into the pregnancy, she was, started to go into labor. She was experiencing. So we went in, and basically the doctors prepared us that that this isn't looking good. They use terrible terms in that too, like you're gonna abort your kid, and just various things. And
Yes.
the person who was like the specialist on hand, his bedside manner couldn't have been worse. Like, he was so clinical and so cold. Having said that, my wife just couldn't have been. She was born to be a mom. She is such a phenomenal mom. And it never even dawned on me that something like this could have been an outcome, right, through pregnancy. But we ended up having a stillbirth. She gave birth to our daughter, and she had already had passed. And going through that, my wife went through a deep depression afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it was scary. And in the midst of that, I knew that if we didn't heal, and if I didn't show some spiritual leadership in this, this is the type of thing that can destroy marriages, right? If the two are, if I'm not communicating and we're not going through this together, it can create a wedge, and we start to grow in separate paths. At the same point, she didn't need the type of leadership where I come in and just try and fix it until everything's going to be okay, right? I knew that wasn't going to be good. And I knew I had my own pain and sadness and grief that I had to deal with. And so I was very quick to access resources. I have had one of my mentors was one of the leading specialists in grief in the world. So I immediately connected with him and had him give some really great referrals. We got into work with a talented therapist. Made sure that I had a whole network of people who were praying, and friends that were checking in on Abby and myself, but had to reflect back, right? Go back to my values, go back to, looking at scripture, going back to, even helping her. Interestingly, we were connected with a nonprofit, Legacy Makers, that does really amazing stuff for families.
Yeah.
And they asked us at one point to write for their field guide something on compassion. And initially I was like, that's not really an area that I do a lot of work on. So I was going to say no. And then Abby said, no, you're going to say yes. We're going to do that. I was like, I've learned to just
go with it.
And she said, not only that, but we're going to write it together, which I was like, oh, that sounds even worse. It sounds like a terrible idea. But she ended up writing from her perspective. We wrote about the stillbirth, and she wrote, she just did it on her own, and then brought it to me, and it brought tears to me. I mean, literally, I cried reading it. And it was so powerful, her sharing, that if I had come in and tried to just fix things and tell her everything's going to be okay, but instead I embraced, right? The word compassion means to suffer with, calm with, and that word passion means to suffer. And so I joined her, right? I just let her know that she wasn't alone. I didn't try and fix it, but, going through it together, and letting her know that her pain and her anger and her sadness and all those things were okay. Was what she needed to find the courage and the healing ability. And, we ended up finding some really great high-risk pregnancy specialists that shared our values of, pro-life, and, that have allowed us now to have two beautiful, healthy kids that we're grateful for. But we really had to tap into a deep sense of resilience, right? Knowing where that true north is, knowing where my limitations were, knowing where my resources were, knowing what I could control and what I couldn't. And being able to lean into those principles to both help heal and go through that journey myself, but also to lead my wife, who really was, in the darkest place I've ever seen her in. Yeah. We grew together, right, through something that we would never have chosen to go through, and, would never wish for anybody. It actually strengthened our marriage. We came out of it, right? That's the idea of radical resilience. Is it's not that we just persist and get through it, but we got through a horrible time stronger and more committed to our marriage and to our desire to have a family than ever.
Yep. Well, yeah, you were tested, but you came out on that side of where you did it together. And when you do, you just become a stronger couple.
Yeah.
But, man, thank you for sharing, person. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question. And that one, sometimes I can't always get through that story without starting to tear up. I realize it's not a bad thing to tear up, but that one's so personal to me when I think about it, and thinking about how scared I was for my wife and all that.
And it was your first pregnancy.
Yeah.
and there's nothing, it's all foggy in the future. Will we ever be able to get pregnant again? Why this child? The pain of the loss, the grief, there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah.
And I know your marriage, and I've seen your marriage, and I see your family, and you're blessed. But man, to have had that test right on the front end, just, it can either break you or make you, and it made you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. It has empowered me. The last thing before I ask you another question, other, some business owners and some people I've worked with that have gone through the same thing. Just someone recently that had their granddaughter, their daughter, their granddaughter that passed, and go through a stillbirth. It's enabled me to step into some of their pain and to do a better job of leading. So it's amazing how God can use, right, some of this things. I don't think God takes any delight. I don't think God ordained for our daughter to die, but God can use what is just a natural part of this life, and he can use it for good. Yes. I think that's an important resilience, truth to be able to hang on to.
You bet.
All right. In your role as the people's pastor at Mariners, what have you observed happens when a man lacks resilience, and what are the downstreams effect of an insecure and fragile man?
Oh gosh. If we had a half an hour, oh my gosh. And again, I have at times been that guy, early on in my life. And, because when you don't have a sense of true north, when you keep hitting the wall, a couple of things happen. You excuse, blame, and minimize your efforts. You're always blaming something. And you become envious of other people. You wish you had somebody else's life. You become covetous of what they've been able to attain. In other words, you become really small. Yeah. And it's really a sad and pathetic life. And I don't stand in judgment of any man, but I've walked with so many men, and usually they're isolated men who have no other perspective than their own. They're operating out of their accrued knowledge or wisdom, which is not enough. That's why God puts us in community. So, like in Proverbs, it says that there is wisdom in the plurality of counselors. But most guys who don't have resilience usually don't have friends. Yeah. And because friends and resilience go together, friends in your faith go together. God never intended us to be isolated or alone. Right. Because all then we have is our own power, our own ability, our own wisdom. But I see guys here hit the wall all the time. And I've got some that I'm working with right now, and my heart just goes out to them because there's tears, because, that on the outside, they look like a man. They might even talk like a man. They talk a good story. But when life requires something, they don't have it. Yeah. Yep. And it really perplexes people. Like I work with a lot of marriages, Andy, and women really expect a man to step up. And you've heard again, the definition of a male is one who steps into and makes order out of chaos. Yep. In other words, the man steps up into struggles or problems or dilemmas. A boy steps back. Right. And so a woman is really conflicted when she sees her husband hit the wall. Like I've got one woman who says, my husband thinks he's working to get another job, and I see him sitting there staring, or he's reading, or he's out weeding, and he's not calling. Because when he gets rejections, it literally lessens his passion to stay at it. He just says, and like I've had men who say, there just aren't any jobs. Yeah. Any man who says that to me, I just go, you're lying to yourself. Yeah. There's jobs, but you're not willing to go after them. You're not willing to build back. And so, again, I see a lot of alcohol use, take the edge off, drug use, sexual immorality. In fact, a man's most vulnerable to pornography when he's hit the wall. Yeah. And he's isolated, he's frustrated, and he wants to feel alive, so he'll move at his sexuality. And I see that all the time. So the church is an incubator in which a man could grow up. He can be the man of resilience and strength, but he's got to do his part, even as God does his part. Yeah. So it's never about I can't, it's I won't. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. In other words, he put the Holy Spirit in us to be able to accomplish what he set out for us. And a lot of guys don't know how to tap into that kind of power.
Yeah, so, the steps into chaos and brings order to it. I see so many men because of the insecurity and fragility. You just don't want to deal with uncomfortable
Yeah.
things, or
Right.
my wife is hard on me, or she criticizes me. So instead they cower.
Yes.
And this isn't to say like we don't lack compassion for people that struggle with these things. We certainly do. But regardless, right, you still need to step up. You
Yes.
still have, whether it's a wife, whether it's kids, whether it's employees, or whoever it is, right? Like yourself and what God's,
Yes.
called you to do. You still have to step up and answer the call, right? You still need to do that. And when you don't, I see like an epidemic of avoidance, of highly avoidant men that just don't want to deal with conflict, don't want to deal with things that are uncomfortable, and it intensifies the chaos, right? It actually pours gasoline on it
Oh,
because, like you said, the people that are looking to leadership for them are just looking for them to be responsible, maybe not even a leader, but they're so perplexed and they're so upset and there's so much hurt that goes downstream, right? And then
well,
a
and
lot of defending
they
ego and
create,
defending, yeah,
yeah, they create a vortex of crap
yeah,
where they suck
there
your
you go,
family into that vortex, the
yeah,
community into that vortex. Yeah, they become needy.
yeah,
And again, I don't think they get there intentionally. A lot of them lack any modeling,
yep,
but they also lack any connection with healthy men
yeah,
because women think they can help a man be a man. And I firmly hold to an axiom that femininity can never bestow masculinity.
yeah,
A man needs to be around other men. And
fully agree.
so I want to ask you another question, Andy, and that is, as a clinical psychologist, I've learned that you're an avid reader. You've probably read every study done on this earth on resilience. And what is one of the most informative studies you've read, and what did you learn about resilience?
Interesting. When I was in grad school, so many years ago, I originally was going to do my dissertation on shame and spent probably almost a whole academic year deep
Yeah.
into the literature on shame. And as I did that, it actually had the effect of amplifying my shame. And so I
Yes.
realized I don't think I want to do another 4 years of this. I need to pivot out of this. And originally, as I try to think of, well, then I should just do the opposite. Interesting. That's the whole positive psychology movement kind of started in a similar reason. But so originally I thought resilience was the antithesis of shame. And I would say authenticity is, right? Because shame is so much about the lack of identity, is believing that you're inadequate, that you're not enough, and robbing you of identity. And authenticity is about having a clear understanding of who you really are, right? Of who God designed you to be. But spent several months. Unfortunately, I didn't get to write my dissertation on resilience because none of the teachers at Azusa had an expertise in resilience, and none of them wanted to develop the resilience that would be necessary to become experts in it. But I spent several months, neck deep into the research and read a lot about, kids that grew up in families with significant trauma, and there was crime and abuse and drug addiction. And unfortunately, overwhelmingly, the greatest likelihood is that you see a repeat of that pattern, right?
Yes.
Again, but you sometimes see these anomalies of people who seem to rise up out of these ashes, and they seem to thrive, and they
Yeah.
seem to create a life for themselves. So, why? What is that? And they found there's certain consistent principles in that. One of the things is the narrative. What did they meaning did they assign to the struggles they went through? Did they see it because it was something wrong with them, that they deserved it, right? Because they just have bad luck, because they're victims. The victim mentality almost always ends up with people repeating the pattern and a lack of resilience. The
Yes.
people who are able to step out of this terrible trauma and thrive were able to find the time that they stood up, that they were courageous, the time that, they received compassion. They found a story that was empowering, and where they were able to turn something really, bad and negative and painful into something positive. And that became the primary meaning that they assigned, and how they saw their own personal narrative to these struggles. And
Mm.
that's a massive indicator. I think we've talked about on here something known as the benefit finding exercise, where
Right.
veterans that experience trauma, they go through a process very similar, where they're able to say, is there something good that can come out of this trauma, and what strengths and character might I build through this, and how could I use that to help others? And it seems to transform trauma from the PTSD route to post-traumatic growth. And so
Yes.
there's something very significant about the meaning that we attach to what we go through. The other thing that stood out, there were several principles, knowing your core values and being able to affirm them on a daily basis creates an inner belief system of self-efficacy. You start to believe that you can overcome hard things when you feel connected to what matters most. That's huge. And then having people, that connection. And the crazy thing from children and resilience is, while it certainly is best if they have somebody who has a consistent, repeated, presence in their life, someone that's significant to, talk truth into them, to see something good in them, that help them to see, resilience and strength in them. But sometimes it was a coach, it was somebody they met just one time, right? Where the person spoke into them and saw something in them that made them question, the messages that they were getting at home. And that was enough for them to all of a sudden find a resilience.
Yeah.
So to me, that always amazes me. And it makes me remember how important sometimes even, one-time encounters are, and the importance of bringing our authenticity and true north into every encounter. You have no idea the downstream effect of that,
Yes.
right? Of how choosing to care about someone, how choosing to speak truth into someone, of how that might affect them years later. I'll wrap this up with Les Brown is a motivational speaker, right?
Right.
One of the more famous ones. And he's got this crazy story of that he grew up. I think he was an identical twin, and he had a terrible learning disorder. They use terms that they don't use anymore. Educably retarded. That's his words, right? Not mine. As the diagnosis and label had been attached to him. And so he'd grown up believing that he was never capable of much, that he was always going to have to set his aim really low. And I think his twin brother was like gifted, right? And so there was this discrepancy in that too. And in school, I think it was in high school, they had some motivational speaker that came in and, started talking about, believing in yourself and the importance of that. And you could see that Les Brown was totally checked out. So he stopped and said, what's going on? Why are you checked out? And he basically said, I appreciate what you're sharing, but that's not for me, right? I know who I am, and I've got this diagnosis and this label, and, I'm never going to amount to much. And the guy told him, don't you ever say that again. Whoever told you that, is a liar. And basically you can be anything that you set your mind to, right? With resilience and a persistence and that. And he went on, right? This is the first time that he ever questioned these labels that had been attached to him. And once he started to question that and persist, right? And all of a sudden he had these breakthroughs. He's arguably one of the most successful motivational speakers of all time. Yeah. It's just so powerful, right? And I think that guy, he just
one person, one speech. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that stood out. And they're all True North radical resilience principles, right? I mean, stuff that I learned 20 years ago. And truth is truth. The things that make you resilient, the things that we tap into, the things that we get a chance to lead people through, they're simple and yet profound. But when you attach to them, they work, and it's amazing how all of a sudden you start to overcome things that you didn't think were possible.
That's right.
I got one more question here.
Yes.
I mean, truth be told, I have a bunch of questions that we'd love to do, and maybe we need to do a version 2 of this.
Yes.
For the sake of not having, a marathon session here, my question is, what have you seen happens when a man develops a clear understanding of what makes him resilient? What type of transformation does this create? And how does his life, business, marriage, how do these things change and transform as a result of that?
God. Once again, $1 million question. So, there's an old Texas saying that worry is like a rocking chair. It gives us something to do, but it doesn't get us anywhere. And
that's good.
Here's what I'll share with you is that if you look at the area of worry, there's a lot of negative thinking that we can get into, a lot of naysaying, a lot of really negative self-talk. If I occupy my mind with I'll never be that, or, well, that's good for him, or, I tried that before. And in other words, I'm in this negative mindset. I'm spending this inordinate amount of time destroying any possibility I have of success. So do I want to turn that around? Now, again, it's not like, I would never say to you, well, Andy, I'm going to go to the Olympics this, next, and I'm going to compete in the long jump and I'm going to win. Well, again, an accurate view of myself.
Yes.
But if I spend an inordinate amount of time putting myself down, believing what everybody else is saying about me, that is time poorly spent. Like, I work with couples who argue incessantly. I said, now, when you think about it, and you're married, and Andy, how many years have you been married?
17.
Yeah, you're a rookie. I'm 44 years. Come on.
43 years is impressive.
But here's the thing is, do I want to spend a lot of my time arguing and fighting over things that don't matter? Because ultimately, when you're married, you're asleep half the time. And 80% of the time you're awake, you're at work. So you have this spectrum of time. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to maximize it? People that are resilient, people that are effective, people that are successful. And by the way, Andy, I'm around them all the time. I work with executives who they've built companies, built incredible legacies through their family, and the one thing you see in them is the use of time. They steward their time well, and they don't waste time, focusing on on failures, bemoaning the trials or tribulations they're in, but they keep pushing forward. And there's just this fight in them to accomplish what it is that God's called them to do. And by the way, that's a big piece, because God's called me to be a husband, a father, a grandfather, a friend. He's called me to be a pastor. And so I have these different roles. And you're not old enough to remember the 60s, Andy, but in all seriousness, there was this movement to find out who I am. And some people were leaving their families. I got to go find myself.
Yeah.
Only to be disillusioned, because you are what you commit to.
Yep.
So if I'm a husband, then I do whatever it takes to stay married to my wife. If I'm a father, I stay and I hold to that role and I care to my kids. I'm not their friend, I'm their dad. If I'm a friend, I'm loyal. I stay in it. I work through the tough issues. The people I most respect are people that have long-term friends, because they've worked through the issues of life. Yeah. So again, maximizing the use of my time, pushing through the barriers, the difficulties in life. Again, it takes, you said it well, a mindset. And I believe I have it. And like the name that God gave me a few years ago is Powerful Finisher. I was going to retire. I've been in ministry 50 years. I thought, I'm kind of done. And he goes, who said you're done? Because retirement is in the Bible. And he gave me this name at Gideon Springs, and it is clear as day. He said, Powerful Finisher. And so when he did that, it energized me. I'm more excited today at age 68 than I've ever been. And so I push through whatever thing I see in front of me to do what it is God called me to do. It's not my agenda, it's his agenda. And again, for each man, it's your spouse, it's your kids, and maybe grandkids if you're blessed. It's the work God's called you to. All of these are sacred things.
Right.
And all I got to ask is, what has God called me to do? And I don't believe God ever calls me to quit.
Yeah. I mean, amen on that. And for anyone, if you haven't met Eric, everything he's saying is just fully authentic and real, and his energy is off the charts. And I think I asked you one time, like, is that because you spend most of your time in doing things that you're intrinsically motivated, right? Things that clearly are what God's put on your heart and that you're passionate about?
Yes. And then, like, for me, when you've discovered who it is God's wired you to be, because again, I got a story of pain and suffering and with no sense of direction, which led me to it possibly would have been death by suicide, because I had no direction. And God saved me, and I found my direction. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to become a pastor, but that's what God called me to do. But whatever work he's called you to do, that is important, sacred work. When you find out what it is God's wired you for, man, you don't ever turn around from it. And I'm going to keep going. But Andy, I do have one last question. I think you can answer it quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think it's important. If someone wanted to take their first step in being resilient, what would they need to do? And do you have resources that you might suggest Is there anything we could offer to help people?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think some of the things we've kind of dropped, little clues here and there, but let's spell them out here carefully. Being in community, and so while certainly I think whether that's working with, pastoral counselor, if that's working with a therapist, if it's working with a coach, but even beyond just the one-on-one, right, which is certainly I think very powerful and an important piece of it. You got to be a part of a larger community. Yeah. So I'm in an executive men's group with Eric in one of Eric's groups. I've got a couple other masterminds that I'm a part of, and those are so invaluable and so incredibly important to me. People who call me out, people who lift me up, people who I can be vulnerable with. All these things. So finding healthy community, and so hopefully you have that maybe at your church, within the men's ministries that you're at. I know because of a mutual friend, Tim Lukai, of course, has been a great guest on here. A lot of churches don't necessarily have a thriving men's ministry, and so if that's not the case, finding resources, please. If you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know where to go, email either myself or Eric, and we'll make sure to connect you and find you some resources. I think from like the journey that I take men on. We start by, again, defining true north. Like before we get into the resilience, let's figure out those things of who God called you to be. Because when you establish that, trying to go straight to resilience, like people, read, there's amazing books out there. And of course, I love reading all of them, Atomic Habits and all these different things that talk about the importance of accountability or habits or, goal setting and these things. But if you don't know who you are and you're focusing on habits and goals and accountability and all these other things that should run downstream from identity, again, it's like throwing paint on the wall and hoping it sticks, right? It's like, well, how do I know what habits to even choose? But if I start from a place of having that foundation of that true north, well, then I know exactly what habits, because they should connect, right, from that true north. They should be consistent with my values, right? They should have a sense of purpose. Every decision that I make gets so much clearer and so much stronger when I first define those aspects of who God authentically created me to be. And that might sound overwhelming as I'm saying this. Well, where in the world do I even start with that? Well, we have a framework, certainly, that we would love to offer or to guide men through, but it's simpler than you realize, right? So even if someone's like, well, I don't have the resources to be able to do that, I'm so passionate about this, and I know Eric is too. Like, if you reach out, we'll get you resources. But starting off by defining core values is one of the first things I do with every man. We've got a specific worksheet, and there's a reason why we use this worksheet. But being able to get clear on these are the 5, or so things that have disproportionate value to everything else in my life, right? These are the things that I stand for. And when I'm able to describe what they mean to me and why they're important and how I want them to show up in my day-to-day life, right, it creates this incredible depth and maturity of understanding of who you are, right? We go back to the Fowler and his stages of, kind of the faith identity. Yeah. When people could go to that level, suddenly they felt much more secure in who they were. And when they started to get challenged and people started to push back and people didn't share their belief systems or had a completely different set of things that were important to them, you no longer felt threatened by that because you were secure in who you were. So now you can better respond to diversity of people, to different perspectives and opinions. You're a much better leader, right? You're more tolerant, loving. You're better positioned as a Christian, right? To really be able to answer difficult questions and in a very healthy and pushy way, to be able to evangelize, right? Because now you're speaking from a place of conviction. And so being able to go to that place, it's amazing. Sometimes that's where men stop on the journey, right? There's like a whole arc of going through TrueNorth Radical Resilience that if you go through the whole process, we now call you exemplars. And those are people that are operating. They've gone through an entire sequence, and it's undeniably very powerful.
And so we can do that both on an individual level or for a team that you might want to take through it.
Yeah. Well said. Just, some people are only able to go through certain parts, but setting the foundation, I'll end there, setting that foundation of understanding, who God's called you to be, and starting with that sense of values. And Eric, I know you've got really powerful, your virtues and character strengths. Like, you start to define those things and you're at least starting off with a great foundation I hope you don't end there. But that,
Yeah.
that, if we're talking about where to start, and then finding community of people who will support and challenge you and love on you. Isolation is an absolute resilience killer.
That's it. Well, Andy, great doing this podcast with you.
Yeah. That was fun. I know my idea of fun, might be a little different, but that was fun for me. Love getting a chance to hear your responses, and we'll do this again, because I think it was an interesting way to do an episode. But for those that are listening, we've agreed to move to season 3. And for season 3, we want to bring in stories of transformation. Right? We're going to bring in real stories. And some of these will actually be able to interview someone that's gone through a transformation from that place of fragility or not knowing who they were and what happened as a result of that, to people who started to be resilient to that true north. And stories are so compelling. It's the way Jesus taught. So we're going to bring in some really powerful stories and make that the focus of season 3.
That's it.
Now go. I hope you have an epic birthday celebration. I know where you're going, and it's not Disneyland, but it might be the second, or maybe it really is the happiest place on earth. So
yeah, not really. If the grandkids love it, it's enough.
Awesome. All right, Eric.
Thanks, Andy.
Connect with you.